YouTube.
Pete Thamel, National College Football Basketball Reporter, Yahoo Sports, has a podcast, Yahoo Sports College Podcast. He wrote his college football summary over the weekend, and part of it was a conversation with Baylor's Dave Aranda. Pete Thamel joins us on Sikkim 365 Radio. Pete, thanks for your time. You had time with him, I guess, over the weekend. How deep is he, in your opinion, when he starts to talk about pretty much any topic, how philosophical he can get?
Yeah, Dave Aranda, who's a wonderful guy, is wired completely different of any football coach I've dealt with in my 20 years covering national college football. He is like the anti-cliche. It's so deep and so thoughtful. Just his answers are just completely different than the archetype of what you get from a normal college football coach, which is one game at a time type of cliches. He almost goes like just completely the opposite direction. It's antithetical to everything we're wired to become accustomed to, and he's really an interesting, neat guy.
Pete, I don't think it would be very possible, and this is a guy who has to cut audio from him to get like little quick sound bites, to get a controversial sound bite in about 5 to 10 seconds from him that would be on the bulletin board because of that philosophical nature. I think it's impossible with him.
I would think it would be very difficult. He is not someone who's you're going to be able to fit the spirit of what he says or sum up what he's saying in a tweet. I just think he goes much deeper than that. I actually didn't do that interview justice in my column because my column is like a notes column, and you don't like to go over 500 words in a note. And I felt like there were 3 or 4 other things that he got into. He talked about how Scott Drew was like Ted Lasso. There was just some other interesting things that I just simply, if I'd gone down that, I would have had to write the whole column about Baylor. And Baylor's been great, but there were a few other big national games this weekend, guys. Obviously, that I had to dedicate some time and energy to. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to talk about those, Pete, but I'm glad you said what you said about Aranda and fitting in quotes because I don't tweet coaches' quotes nearly as often as I used to with an Art Briles or a Matt Rule. It's just it's hard to with Dave Aranda, so like it's the way he answers questions. But what have you made of that 5-1 start for Aranda and the Bears? I noticed that there's starting to be a little bit of a tension across the country as far as people noticing the start that he's off to and the rebound from last year. Obviously, an impressive win over West Virginia, but some big games ahead. What do you make of Baylor at this point, the midway point of the season?
Well, I guess I'll start with giving a lot of credit to Mack Rhodes, who didn't flinch. Right, you can have a bad early season. You get some younger, inexperienced athletic directors, and they may flinch a little bit. And Dave is so deep in his thinking. He analyzed exactly what was wrong, and they went out and fixed the offense. I think you can say at this point, right? I mean, the differential between the offense from last year to this year is just comical. It's so much different. So give Matt credit for knowing he had the right guy, building the right culture, and not worrying that the right results weren't immediately there. And then from there, credit Dave and the players. Dave went out of his way to credit Jerry Bohannon, obviously the quarterback. He's like, look, he could have left. He knew he was going to have to fight for his job. And, he was just really – I think he has, 11 touchdowns and no interceptions. There would be an unknown with a new coordinator. And look, it's easy to go hit the portal, right? Everybody's doing it. And you could if you're a talented quarterback like that, you're going to get some pretty fancy logos that are going to show up on your cell phone. And Bohannon stuck around, and I think that's one of the biggest signs that there's a deep belief in Dave Aranda. And as these players get to know him, I can only imagine that's going to increase.
How about the comment he made about being their stepdad last year?
Yeah, it was unique. It was a unique comment. I mean, it was just true. Like that's what struck me about his comments is they were delightfully unvarnished. And I mean, how difficult would it have to be to try to get to know 100 new players and do it via Zoom? And I had spoken to him at some juncture of the pandemic last year for a story, and he talked about attempting to do that, but it's just nothing can take the place of looking at people in the eye and building and bonding relationships that way. And I think too now, Baylor's recruited quietly very well, and I think Dave's a certain type of kid is going to be attracted to Dave Aranda. probably not the one with the most Instagram followers or chasing, every NIL, basket of chicken fingers they can get, right? It's going to be someone who sees the value of a Baylor education and someone who would value a relationship with a random.
Speaking of the NIL basket of chicken fingers, that brings me to Spencer Rattler this week and the likelihood that he gets benched. In the overall world of an NIL, I'd be kind of bummed if I was raising canes and my guy got benched. Do you see him being the quarterback at all going forward at Oklahoma? And what does that win mean for Oklahoma going forward to the national championship picture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, the NIL thing was a little bit of a joke. Like, I don't begrudge these kids at all. And anyone who thinks, in my opinion, anyone thinks the NIL deals are getting in the way of performance or affected performance, I think it's completely asinine. I just do. I just think this is the reality, and I'm not saying this about Spencer Rattler or anybody else, but these kids were all getting money, food, cash, cars before, and it took a lot more work to get them under the table, right? You'd have to, cloak and dagger, meet with a shady agent, do all that stuff. It's all above board now. I would think it actually takes away less of their time and energy than it would have in the past. So that said, I think Spencer Rattler is going to be the prettiest girl in the portal, right? It's going to be hard for him to, just because he had a couple bad games, that doesn't mean there's no market. I mean, look at JT Daniels got beat out by Keaton Slovis at USC. He ended up on his feet, and I could completely see Spencer Rattler having a robust market. He is really talented. When you talk to NFL people before the season, they believed in Spencer Rattler. I just don't think there's enough of a body of work there to go. Now, would he get drafted? Yes. Would he fulfill the potential that he should have? Probably not. So I would expect him to be playing for, a high-end Pac-12 ACC school, maybe Big 12 school, probably not though, in the next season. And there's nothing that would not stun me if he was really good.
Pete, what were your thoughts on that Oklahoma comeback win? I mean, Texas looked fantastic early on, just couldn't hold the lead. And, obviously Caleb Williams, a star is born on Saturday with his performance. Just everything that came with that game from Texas' early lead to OU's comeback to the ramifications of it all. I mean, that's the Red River at its best, don't you think?
Oh, what a spectacle that game was! It was like 3 Netflix seasons all rolled into one game. I'm bullish on Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams is a star, and I said that on our podcast this year that it wouldn't surprise me if he pushed Rattler. And I mean, I liked Rattler, but I mean, he got benched last year for Red River too. Now, he wasn't this perfect. He wasn't this perfect prospect, and so. But I think Caleb Williams has staying power, and I think he's, I think, again, it's hard to say he lives up to the other Oklahoma quarterbacks, right? Because that means you're, the Heisman Trophy winner and the first pick in the draft, pretty much, right? Yeah. But do I see Caleb Williams as having the poise, the pedigree, the arm talent to really go crush it at Oklahoma? Yeah, I do. It'd be interesting to see where they are by the time they go to Waco this year, right? Because that's late November, mid-November. Yeah, and quite frankly, look, if Baylor keeps doing that, football calendar, and there's a good chance there'll be a ranked Baylor team at that point. Obviously, going to take care of business against a very good BYU team, and I can't stress that enough. A very, very good BYU team that is not going to get pushed around, that has an explosive offense, that will have the best tailback on the field, comes in next week. But, yeah, I think it would be interesting to see how far Baylor has come by measuring them with a home game against Oklahoma in November.
Pete, you of course have been a part of and ahead of a lot of what's going on with the realignment or expansion, the college football playoff. And we mentioned earlier NIL, there's the transfer portal, there was COVID last year. Have you ever, in all of your time, seen so many major stories in college athletics or college football as we have? It's kind of been condensed in a short amount of time?
It's been a wild run. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's just been a wild run. Stories that would be it's like the Labor Relations Board memo that just happened that could transform the sport. NIL could transform the sport. I mean, there have been relentless seismic changes that have come, and it makes an exciting time to cover the sport on the macro level. But no, this is, I think, my 19th year covering national colleges. I've never seen anything like this, just in terms of the amount and volume of news that's come at the at the level that it has. Realignment's part of that, obviously, but yeah, it has been a wild 18 months. You think about the impact COVID had on last season, and shoot, some teams didn't even play, right? So it has been a very, very compelling couple months. Hopefully that translates to some job security for us suckers in the media, right? There's enough happening.
Yeah, no question about it. Pete Thamel, Yahoo Sports, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio.
Pete, could you imagine even a week ago college football playoff without both Alabama and Georgia? And now that Alabama took a loss, they're out of mulligan. So if they lost to Georgia in the SEC title game, they could be out of that thing completely.
Yeah, I'm not going to rule out a 2-loss Alabama. I'm just not. I lived through the 2007 season, and I was a young pup reporter. And if 2-loss LSU can make the national title game in a system that only allows two teams to play for the title, I am not ruling out 2-loss Bama. I'm just not doing it. So, if it's just there's a lot of brand bias, and look what that room did to Cincinnati last year. I mean, they shamed them out. But 2-loss Alabama, I would not want to be 1-loss Oklahoma or 1-loss Iowa or probably not 1-loss Ohio State, because that means they would have won the league. They'd probably get in. But any of these Pac-12 schools, I'd be shuddering. If you're a 2-loss league champion, you're not getting in over Alabama with 2 losses. And look, the chaos ain't stopping, boys. It's not stopping. It's coming. Parity is hit. It's hit hard and fast. And I think defenses generally have figured out enough ways to slow offenses. I don't have the numbers in front of me this year, but I just feel like there's better plans out there right now. And look, it's a bad year for quarterbacks in college football. If you had asked before the season who would have been the quarterback picked in the top 15, they would have said Slovis, Rattler, and Howell, right? With maybe Malik Willis kind of flirting around there as an interesting guy. Well, Howell could still get picked relatively high, but I don't think Slovis gets drafted, and I don't think Rattler goes to the draft. So the point is, some of that onus, we've just been in this era of a relentless offense. I mean, look, you guys witnessed it, obviously, with what Coach Bryles did at Baylor, and that revolution of the tempo helped bring a lot of that to the forefront. I just think we're seeing a little bit of a market correction, and it's created a little bit of a plateau around the sport.
Is it great timing for college football chaos with the discussion about the expansion of the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. Here's the thing. If one of the powers of this 12-team plan, which will get passed, I wrote that on Friday, it's going to get passed. It's just a matter of when, and some details getting ironed out, and some egos getting smoothed over. But, Baylor would be in the playoff discussion if there's a 12-team playoff. And no offense, they're not in it in a 14 playoff right now. You could sit there and say, oh, you beat BYU, you're in the top 15. You beat Oklahoma, you're in. That's all pretty real. There'd be a discussion if Baylor went to the Big 12 title game and lost and had 2 losses that they could get in, right? So I just think that energizes a lot of different markets, guys, right? If you're at Oregon State until last week, you're thinking you could be one of those 12. If you're at SMU, obviously Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina would be one of those 12 for sure, right? They're playing App State, and eventually I think they have Louisiana. Those games are playoff implication games. That's just good. You're flipping on the TV to see those games and to watch those games because it all could fit in this different matrix. Kentucky's favored to make a 12-team playoff at this point this year. So just think about how that changes the paradigm of a game like this weekend and how it is. And I just think it's an energy jolt to the entire sport, and it's good for the entire sport.
Pete, I know you always have your kind of finger on the pulse of what's going on with the coaching hot seat. 3 guys who come to mind would be Scott Frost, Ed Orgeron, and Manny Diaz. Are those guys in more severe trouble than we may even realize, even though they're talked about quite a bit?
three very different cases. Orgeron probably is going to get fired. I wrote that last week. I don't see that changing. Frost and Manny, I ultimately I think Frost gets fired. It's going to be expensive, $20 million, and Orgeron $17 million. There is just a huge, strong pull of it's different firing Scott Frost at Nebraska, right? It would be like firing RG3 if he was ever the Baylor coach. Like that's just a different conversation because of who he was as a player and is in the community and in the football sphere there. And it's Trev Alberts, who's kind of one of those similarly quintessential Nebraska figures who have to do it. And then Manny Diaz, almost to me, hasn't got a ton of time, but there's also, at a certain point, Miami has to sit back and say, is it the coach or is this something bigger with this job? Do the expectations need to be traced? Do we need to support it better? Like, I feel like Miami has churned through enough underachieving coaches, and you never want to chase like Miami's achievement, right? Because it's like the best, one of the best runs ever in the history of the sport, with the best teams ever assembled. But I do think there is if you step back at Miami and like, why are they bad? Well, the entire SEC just blitzed away from the entire ACC. When you start talking in terms of television money, that getting the network a decade sooner, and when Miami was rolling, Alabama was toiling, Georgia couldn't figure it out. But the money coming from the success of the SEC has enabled and emboldened these programs to run at an unbelievably high level. And all of a sudden now Miami's going to lose kids to Georgia and Alabama, in South Florida. Of course they are. They're going to lose kids to Clemson. Absolutely. And so I think when Miami looks at its future, and I do think Manny Diaz probably deserves a little more time, it needs to really look at like, okay, a decade from now, how can we be back in the conversation with those instead of just like firing one guy, bringing the next, bringing a new coordinator? It just seems like they've been thinking like the NCAA thinks, like reactively and what's right in front of my nose instead of holistically and how do we really build the roots and the foundation to do this. So yeah, it'll be not a quiet time with with less financial pandemic restrictions on universities themselves, right? Because even 2020, say you want about them, universities were financially compromised, attendance, tuition, all that kind of stuff. So with that, I just think inherently we're going to see more activity in carousel.
Hey, Pete, thank you. I know you got a lot on your plate. We do too, and we appreciate your time so much. Thanks for jumping in and talking a lot also about Dave Aranda and your conversation with him.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Pete Thamel, Yahoo Sports columnist, also has the podcast on college football as well with Yahoo Sports. In a minute, we'll hear from